Hello everybody, my name is Dratnos, and today we have a bunch of developments from the Dragonflight development cycle that I figured I would try and break down so that you know what's going on, what it looks like is happening with Dragonflight, and then I will give my takes and try and also give kind of an idea of at least the takes that I've seen floating around on several of these different issues. So a bunch has come out today. The first thing that I want to talk about is this post, which says, we feel it would be useful to let everyone know where we are in the development of Dragonflight classes and talents. With the next build, we're transitioning away from spending the majority of our time on the design iteration of the new talent trees, and we're now primarily focused on fixing bugs and tuning the game. This includes balancing talent choices against each other and tuning the throughput of each class. We want to ensure that we release an expansion of the highest quality for this incredible community. That being said, the new talent systems constitute a tremendous change to the game and represent a fundamental overhaul to how classes and specializations are customized by players. It is our expectation that we'll be making adjustments based on your feedback throughout the expansion's lifetime. We greatly appreciate all your testing, blah, 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 blah. So, few things that this post screams. One is, to me at least, the 2022 release plan seems to still be what they're aiming for here. Maybe that leaked timeline of a late October pre-patch and a late November expansion is something that I would say that this makes that more likely, that this sort of is evidence reinforcing that that's what they're going for. And I would say that most talent trees are in a state where moving it to the balancing talent choices against each other and balancing the throughput of each class is pretty good. It's a good thing to do for most of the talent trees. There are a few that have some issues that I think could still be, I guess, more kind of medium scope overhauls. Guardian Druid, I feel like doesn't have a bunch of interesting builds. That could be one to do. Shockwave's position on the warrior tree seems extremely nonsensical to me, occupying like a bottom spot, competing against some really big damage options down there. The monk statues at the bottom of the monk tree, not super excited by. A few other things like that there are a few trees where I feel like just balancing the choices isn't necessarily what I think they could still use a little bit more like design iteration. But they haven't said that they're not going to do any of that. They said they're transitioning from spending the majority of their time, and they're primarily focused on fixing bugs and tuning the game. So hopefully there's still room for some more kind of slight overhauls to some of the trees. But if not, I do think most trees are ready to move to this balancing and tuning thing. And in fact, if they are going to try and release this year, which it looks increasingly likely that they're trying to do, that's something that is a very high priority to make sure that the game is functional when it comes out. A lot of abilities also still don't work. A lot of talents also still don't work. That's a very high priority. That should be a very high priority as well. This part also is somewhat revealing that they'll be making adjustments throughout the expansion's lifetime to stuff like talent systems. You know, usually you'd kind of think that this would be the sort of thing that would mostly happen between expansions rather than during them. So interesting that they're sort of pre-committing to doing some talent rework type stuff to whatever needs it most during the expansion. Obviously, best case, that happens before the expansion comes out, but it is much better that they'd be willing to do this than that they wouldn't be, all other things being equal. So that's come out. Further news is Preservation Evoker. They are buffing Preservation to 30-yard range instead of 25-yard range. We've been reading feedback, observing playtests, and agree that the 25-yard range is a little too prohibitive when combined with frequent casting requirements of Empower spells, so they are buffing the range of the spec to 30. They're buffing Hover a little bit, and they're buffing Dream Breath and Spirit Bloom slightly with Overhaul. Or actually, they're buffing the overall healing and making it so you have to cast Dream Breath and Spirit Bloom less often, so that you don't have to stand still and cast Empower spells as often. So the average healer has a 40-yard range. A 30-yard range sounds like almost 40 yards. It's actually not anywhere close to as much area coverage. If you were thinking about like a boss room, how many square feet you could cover, it's actually 56% as much area as you could cover if you had a 40-yard range when you have a 30-yard range. So you're still looking at a spec that's covering barely half the area of the other healers, which Preservation Evoker I'm fairly sure is going to be flagged as a range. It's going to be targeted by all the ranged effects on various fights. So it won't be able to do the thing of like Holy Paladins and Mistweavers of standing in melee and ignoring those mechanics that those specs sometimes get to do. I'm still extremely worried about this part of the kit. I don't think it will be a particularly good thing to have be the identity of the spec. And I think this is the kind of thing that they're going to look back on and realize is a mistake at some point in the future. I guess maybe we're at a point this late in the testing where it's maybe too late to change it, but I do think this is going to be one of those things where like we come back in 2 years' time and we're like, okay, yeah, that was a mistake. How could we have known this was going to be a mistake? When we announced it, everybody said it was going to be a mistake, but we kept trying it, and then it sucked. So to clarify, I think for Mythic Plus it'll be fine, but for Mythic rating, I think this is going to be a serious barrier to seeing many Preservation Evokers in high-end comps. I do think you'll probably be able to play it and kill bosses post-nerf, but trying to kill bosses before they get nerfed for the first time is going to be a really hard thing, I think, on this spec. But I'm not a healer main. I do make decisions about healers all the time, trying to figure out what comps are going to be good going into a tier, but I don't play one myself. So take that with a grain of salt. That being said, I think the other problem with Preservation is it is the hover, like the 30-yard range, if they were able to kind of dash around or temporarily increase their healing range more often, I think would be good. I still don't think that hover is going to be enough for doing that. A big problem is you can't press hover in the middle of a cast, and you can't cast an Empower spell while hovering either. So even though hover is supposed to give you this cast while moving thing, it's really clunky because of those factors. And they actually clarified in one of the threads that like they've thought about and have decided not to change that part of how hover could work, because hover, when you press hover, you like dash a little bit, and so they can't make it castable while casting without people canceling their casts because they try and strafe and then press hover, because you'd have to start strafing first, right? And they would cancel your cast before the hover came out. And also they can't make it work with Empower spells as well for some other reasons. So all of this ends up meaning you've got this spec that wants to be mobile, it wants to be smooth feeling, and it's got this extremely clunky piece of mobility, and I don't think it will feel good or be good unless they just make it do an absolute boatload of healing, which there's a good chance they will, because they might want the new spec to be played, in which case then we will play it if it does a boatload of healing. Other news, we have the Vault of the Incarnates raid testing schedule. The next 3 Thursdays and Fridays will comprise testing of normal, heroic, and mythic. Actually, normal is just going to be tested over the weekend, and Raid Finder is going to be tested over the weekends as well, and heroic and mythic testing is on those Thursdays and Fridays. And notably, Razageth the Storm Eater, the last boss, is not going to be raid tested, so there's only 7 bosses that need to be tested. This is bad news for players that need to do raid testing and that also want to play Wrath Classic. That's a pretty small set of players. End of the day, I think the wheels should not stop for those people, as sad as it is for them. I think that's, a couple hundred people that like people in like Echo Liquid that want to play Wrath Classic will be bummed out by this, but and people in my guild as well, there'll be people in top guilds that will be sad about this. Most other people, not a big deal, and definitely not something they should delay raid testing for. One thing that is a little bit concerning is that we still don't have set bonuses either, and of course we still have a bunch of abilities that are non-functional on beta 2. So the next beta build is going to be the one that we do this first round of raid testing on. If that doesn't at least fix a lot of the abilities, make them, mostly functional, it's hard to imagine that they'll get much good data about how classes are functioning. And I'm going to assume that the tier set bonuses won't magically all be in on that build either, but maybe they will. Maybe the set bonuses are almost ready. They've got the art is ready. There's some cool lightning effects that you don't see in this article, but that the Warlock one has. There's a lot of cool sets. They look good. They do need bonuses though, and those set bonuses are very important for how good specs will be relative to each other in the first tier. I do think there's still good information they can get from like the playing just the baseline specs in the raid testing. I think that'll be valuable, but I am getting a little bit worried about the set bonuses especially being like another moving part that they have to slot in while the talents are still all being tuned and moved around as well. I do think there's a very good chance that this first raid tier, this Vault of the Incarnates raid tier, is going to include some tremendous outliers in terms of throughput over the first few weeks. So depending on how they choose to adjust that, we may see some unprecedentedly large mid-tier buffs or nerfs, or we may just see a relatively unbalanced meta where the best specs are way better than the worst specs, which, at the end of the day, like, maybe that's not something to delay an expansion for, but it is at least going to be I think this increases the chances of a bumpy start, at least for the, like, high-end tuning thing. I'm also worried about a bumpy start on the bugs end as well, because, again, the talent overhaul is a massive change to the kind of skeleton, the core of the game, and not too much time left to sort it all out and to get all of them, functional. So, yeah, again, those are just my thoughts. There's an update on how beta development's looking. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one. Bye.